I said, no, I'm dead serious. I have seen the future. It's called Passive House. We've got to build one. And I believed in it so much. We put our family home on the market. We basically sold our house, bought a site, and designed and built this passive house that we're still living in 21 years later.
Hello, and welcome to the Reimagine Edit, a special series of the Passive House podcast that shares curated insights from the conversations happening in the Reimagine Buildings Collective, our membership community where we bring together climate-conscious builders, designers, and changemakers so that we can share hard-won lessons, level up our work, and build the networks we need to thrive. In this episode 11, we'll hear from Tomas O'Leary, Joe Lstiburek, Ed Ettinger, Martín Comas, Shefali Sanghvi, and Lindsey Love. I'm Zack Semke, Director of Passive House Accelerator and host of the Reimagine Buildings Collective, and thanks for joining me. Let's get started with an excerpt from Tomas O'Leary's special Reimagine Tuesday interview with Michael Ingui. Tomas, who heads up Mozart, has been an absolutely pivotal figure in the spread and adoption of Passive House throughout the English-speaking world and beyond. Here he shares the moment when the light bulb turned on for him.
I ended up at a conference where there was a Swedish architect talking about Passive House. And he described a situation where the house ended up getting a bit cold, and the occupant noticed that the temperature in the house was dropping a little bit. So she called the architect, who was our presenter that day, and he went out in his snow boots. It was minus 25 centigrade. And he went down into the basement, and the heat pump hadn't been working for over a week. He saw the log on it. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, it took this lady a week to recognize that her house was getting a little bit uncomfortable at minus 25 Celsius. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, this is actually unreal. And I'd never heard of Passive House before. I had no training in building science. I had no idea what it was, but I rang my wife in the conference, Mairead, and I said, Mairead, we're going to sell our family home and we're going to build this thing called a Passive House. And she thought I was kind of smoking something or drinking something or snorting something or maybe all three at the same time. And I said, no, I'm dead serious. I have seen the future. It's called Passive House. We've got to build one. And I believed in it so much. We put our family home on the market. We basically sold our house, bought a site, and designed and built this Passive House that we're still living in 21 years later.
So Tomas saw the future, and the rest is history. Next, we hear from another luminary, Joe Lstiburek, founding principal of Building Science Corp. The Wall Street Journal called Joe the Dean of North American Building Science, and Fast Company magazine called him the Sherlock Holmes of construction. Here, he explains why dehumidifiers can be so important, and he introduces a new form of metric measurement along the way.
Forgive me for going to this point, but I became again famous by saying two things. Air conditioners are dehumidifiers, but they only dehumidify when they're running.
Right.
Got this? So what have we done to the runtime of our air conditioners? We've dramatically reduced them because we're insulating up the yin-yang wazoo. Those are metric terms. One yin-yang is two wazoos. And so what happens is that the air conditioners don't run long enough to dehumidify. And it gets worse. The indoor air cult believes that dilution is the solution to indoor pollution, which is not. Source control is, but that's another, you need to invite me back. That's an entire discussion. So when you're bringing in a bunch of outside air in Austin, your part load humidity is insane. And so there's no way you can ventilate without also having a dehumidifier. And so when you're ventilating at ASHRAE 62 rates, and your efficiency of the AC is 15 SEER, and you're actually building to the code minimum thermal resistance, which is not very high, but if not compared to what Passive House is, there's no freaking way that you can make this work without having a dehumidifier. Now, the only way to reduce that energy is you also have to use what we call an ERV, an energy recovery ventilator, because you're going to throw the interior air out and bring in outside air. You don't want to throw the cool out and the dry out. You want to prevent the hot and the wet from coming in. So you want to build them tighter than a Scotsman in a bar. You want to insulate up the yin-yang wazoo. You want to have a separate cooling system from a dehumidification system, an energy recovery ventilator. And if I was in charge, which apparently I'm not, I would ventilate according to the contaminants I measure in the space as opposed to what people tell me.
So good, so good. Next up, we hear from engineer and high performance building trailblazer Ed Ettinger about kitchen exhaust in big buildings in New York City.
In New York City explicitly, a 2358 1200 CFM hood is a very luxury type of a thing, because the dollar per square foot in a rental or a sale or a condo or whatever gets really expensive really fast. And if a duct turns from 1 square foot to 10 square feet, and it's a 20-story building, the lost saleable square footage turns into a really big number really fast. And the code, our code, I'm pretty sure it's a New York specific code change, says when you do exhaust quantities over 75 CFM, when you're like a high-rise building, you have to treat that differently. So we in practice, but for kind of very luxury scenarios, don't really see a lot of 235 800 CFM ducted hoods. The under the floor is a wonderful solution at let's call it an individual 600 CFM hood type of application. And it's something we've done and the trick, which comes back to one of the things Aaron said, is there's a lot of energy in fresh air. So if you have to condition the fresh air coming through the kitchen, you're in trouble, kind of. So one of the key moves is to make sure that you do kind of what Debbie was talking about. Once through, or injecting fresh air near where the exhaust is leaving so that you're not actually paying the penalty for that exhaust.
Now let's bring Tomas O'Leary back. I was surprised to hear the heating source for his house in rural Ireland, but in this clip, he contrasts how long it took for things to finally get moving and start to take off compared to the big movement that he's seeing now in passive house uptake.
Yeah, it was very difficult in the beginning. Like, we built this rocket ship in rural Ireland, and it was amazing. It worked very well. We involved universities. We were monitoring this thing. You could heat this house on a fart. It was costing nothing, and I thought to be queue a mile down the road. Lots of people came to see it, but nobody signed up. It was too early, far, far, far too early. So it took, I'm not kidding, it took probably 2 decades, at least 15 years, for people to actually sit up and say, this is freaking awesome. We're going to start doing this at scale. The construction sector is very conservative, and I include architects, engineers, building services engineers, especially. No offense, Lois is an exception, and there may be others as well here. Like, the fraternity of people designing and building buildings is very, very conservative. And the key lesson, I would say, Michael, for everybody here today is, you've got to show people real projects. They've got to put their hand on it. They've got to see it to believe it. And the most effective way to convince people is to bring them and show them stuff. I remember Lois and I went to, I organized a trip from the US to Brussels in 2015, because we had this perception problem that passive house is just for houses. And I said, frick this. I was sick of explaining what passive house is. So I said, right, we're going to go to a city, a region, a third of Belgium. We talk about Brussels, but the Brussels region is a third Belgium. And so I organized at great risk, because I'd booked hotels, I'd booked everything. Like, there's a lot on the line here. And we had a fantastic delegation, including Lois, and people from Vancouver, people from Seattle, and so forth, and including the developer and the client for the Cornell, the house, Cornell Passive House Tower. And honestly, within like 24 hours of being in Brussels, everybody was signed up. Absolutely, let's do this. And I've seen that again and again and again. So with that, Michael, what's happening is the building regulations are ramping up. They're notching up and notching up and notching up. And what's happening now is that developers and builders and contractors are getting tired of this cyclical iteration. Now it's this, and in 5 year time it's going to be that, and then it's going to be this, and then it's going to be that and the other. Whereas passive house, you've summited Everest if you do passive house. You are done. You are finished in terms of energy efficiency, comfort, and well-being. And what we're noticing now in the marketplace is that people are just cutting to the chase because they can see now it's taken 20 years to get there, but they can see the writing is on the wall. And like we're involved, we have about 13,000 apartments under construction right now, just between Ireland and the UK. And the big guys, like the largest house builder in Ireland, is called a company called Cairn Homes. They're a publicly listed company. They have now committed to passive house.
So encouraging. And I want to share two quick follow-ups on what Tomas just discussed. First, to learn more about the Cairn Home story that he just mentioned, please check out episode 250 of the Passive House podcast featuring Stephen O'Shea, the head of sustainable construction at Cairn Homes. Second, that pilgrimage to Brussels was a huge moment for the spread of Passive House in North America. Among lots of other immediate impacts, the lessons learned and stories brought home from that trip helped propel the important code progress in Vancouver, BC 10 years ago, which then inspired progress province-wide in British Columbia. And then later in Massachusetts and New York and elsewhere, it helped inspire the first big multifamily passive house project, Orchards at Orenco, outside of Portland, Oregon, which provided proof of concept for everything that followed. And it's that Brussels trip just had tons of ripple effects, super important and impactful. Okay, next up, we hear from Martín Comas, the Uruguayan architect who's the force behind Car Tool Housing, a 400 square foot passive house prototype that's fast, self-built, and radically low-tech.
As I always say, if I can do it, anybody can do it. So just, I don't know, go and do things. We have to build, because I see in Latin America, for example, we are like, it's immersed in this passive house people, but most of them are in the theoretical place, like universities, and it's like okay, but not happening much in on site. Okay, so I like to like make things happen, because if not, why do we study all this? And I like to share it, so anybody can go and watch my YouTube videos where I appear there like Benny Hill, moving very fast, but to make it happen, not boring. But there you can watch it, what I am doing, or follow us from I don't know, LinkedIn, web, or whatever. But I am very, very excited of participating of this, and very thank you very much, Zack, for letting me participate and share what I do on your space, which I feel is amazing.
In the next clip, we hear from Shefali Sanghvi, head of sustainability at Datner Architects and frequent co-host at our Passive House Accelerator live events, as she shares how she persuades clients to build to Passive House.
I say this often, so apologies in advance if you've heard me say this before, but I will say positioning this from like a practitioner or firm leadership point of view, a good way to position this is by saying like, we're just getting ahead of code changes. We know that codes are going to get updated and we want to stay ahead of them, and we want to make sure that our clients feel confident that we know what this is. So I'm going to take some time and research what the new energy code is or what the new building code is. And that gives you that opportunity to say like, okay, well, now we know this is happening, like electrification is happening, or some sort of carbon emission tax is coming, whether it's a code or a local law or whatever, however it works for wherever you are. I have found that to be really helpful. And I think that for us, even for how forward-thinking Datner is in our housing studio, we still had many clients that didn't feel the compulsion to find the money to support Passive House. But when we started looking at code changes in 2019, pre-COVID, and we were like, electrification is coming and we need to position ourselves to be ready for electrification. So even though there was like a affordable housing carve out, we knew that our projects sometimes get delayed, and it would cost clients more money to design with gas and then have the project delayed and then have to redesign for full electrification. That was a big way that we were able to shift that narrative and shift that way of thinking. And it became less like, I think this is a good idea and I need to convince you that it's a good idea, and more about, you don't really have a choice. You need to do this. We can help you on this journey. And once you've convinced them that like you are that leader and you are their friend in this potentially costly journey, then it became easier to be like, look, if you only do this few more things, and yes, I'm going to be upfront with you, it's going to cost more money. But if you do these few more things, then you get this building as a result. And being open and upfront about that delta between a code compliant or, within 5-year code compliant building and a passive house building was the way that we started this conversation. And I'm not gonna lie, like there were definitely clients who were like, cool, but we still can't afford to do that. Or until someone tells us we have to, we're just not gonna do it. But there were clients that were like, okay, I'm mission driven, or I really want to make sure that tenants are happy, or I see this as a marketability tool. And we were able to work with the client, with the MEP engineer, with the contractor, who at the time may not have had the familiarity that they do now with passive house, to say like, these are the lessons we've learned. This is what we understand to be different from a code compliant building. What are your experiences with this? And let's work together to bridge that gap. So like, I guess that was a really long-winded way of saying that code and policy is definitely your friend, and then being really open, honest, and upfront that it's not going to be easy, but you are an expert or you've done the research and you can help that, and being really willing to share that knowledge with other consultants and not feeling like, oh, this is my IP, and if I share this, then they'll take this and go somewhere else with it. And it's like, for me, I'm like, yeah, that's the best possible outcome, that a client is like, well, Datner said that this is all you had to do with another architect. And then another architect was like, oh, you're right. It is not that much more than what we have to do. Like, that is the way that like seed, that passive house seed kind of grows and propagates throughout our industry.
And last but not least is Lindsey Love, natural materials expert and owner of Regenerative Building Solutions. Here she outlines the natural materials information that's available now and her hopes for the development of the movement.
We can't buy these things at Home Depot yet. I mean, you can buy jean insulation there. That's a good product. And cellulose is also a fantastic product, as I'm sure all of you know. These resources are pretty critical. And I can't help but say, like, I'm a resource for this organization. I did a whole Natural Insulations 101, which is a really great list of different products. And then the CASBA, California Straw Bale Association, is a great resource. They do not only know about straw bale, their leadership is developing the codes for cob and adobe and rammed earth and straw bale, like light straw clay, everything. They've done fire studies. They have lists of insurance providers and banks that will finance. The Natural Building Alliance, which is hosting the conference that Karen is going to be presenting at. We would love it if any of you want to join us for that. It's coming up in September. I will say I don't think we quite have the list of resources that the CASBA does yet, but we have some, and we have a lot of professionals on the board that are very experienced. I don't think any of them do consulting other than myself. And then the Bio-Based Materials Collective is also obviously a fantastic resource. They are developing what's probably going to be the most robust education platform, I hope, within the next 5 years. And then there's various other smaller ones and maps of providers that are available. There's a lot of us out there. We've just kind of grown from this like homegrown DIY movement, and so it's not as well like collected or documented as, say, the passive house organizations.
With that, thank you to Tomas, Joe, Ed, Martín, Shefali, and Lindsey for sharing their insights with us. And as I've said before, because it is 100% true, these clips just scratch the surface. So if anything piqued your interest here, please do dive into the full replays of these sessions available in the Reimagine Buildings Collective. And if you're not yet a member of the collective, we'd love to have you. In addition to all the cool direct access that you'll get to experts and peers who are on the same journey as you with buildings and resilience and climate, we're also launching 8 fall labs this season, building on the success of our Reimagine Summer Labs. So if you're interested in being part of a small group think and do tank for a couple months, check us out at reimaginebuildings.com. Speaking of joining the collective, a big welcome to our newest members, Matthew Stanfield, Gary Mosier, Lisa Piper Gilbert, Tim Pula, Erica Dunn, Brandon Burmeister, Rachel White, Stuart Goringer, Caitlin Moore, Ben Ellie, Elena Bresciani, Peter Holtzman, Michael Lind, Chris Goodwin, and Martín Comas. Welcome to the collective. With that, thanks for listening to this 11th episode of the Reimagine Edit, a production of the Passive House podcast by Passive House Accelerator. As always, please reach out with anything Reimagine Buildings Collective related, what you'd like to see on the platform, any ideas you'd like to share, guests we should invite, courses we should offer. We're building this community with you, so let us know. And don't forget to invite your friends and colleagues to join us. Thank you, and have a great couple of weeks. Be well.